From Trimble Construction, you're listening to the Connected Construction Show, where we connect you to the contractors, owners, designers, engineers, and construction professionals who are finding better ways to work. And now, here's your host, Matt Sprague.
Hello and welcome to the Connected Construction Show. I am your host, as always, Matt Sprague. We are here still at the 2022 Dimensions at the Venetian Resort in Las Vegas. Accompanying me today is Alice Leung from Brick Mortar Ventures. Thank you so much for joining us, Alice.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell our viewers, listeners, a little bit about yourself, your background, where you come from, what you currently do at Brick Mortar, and how you got to this point in your career.
Yeah, so I started my career in construction with DPR construction. Actually did a couple of internships, not knowing anything about industry. So I studied electrical engineering, worked on I was part of the Formula SAE car team. And DPR actually recruited from that group because it was a bunch of people who liked working with their hands, and construction is a very kind of physical, you're building real physical things. So it was actually through that group that I, by chance, took an internship with DPR without knowing anything about construction.
Yep.
And fell in love with just, problem solving, I think, is like how I boil it down. What is construction? It's problem solving on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of the times you're solving a lot of problems in one day. And getting to work with the guys in the field who, have their craft, that are putting things together, ranging from those folks all the way to, the project executives who are looking at spreadsheets all day, and then, to working with architects and owners. So it was just a very cool kind of, all these people that you had to bring together to build a physical thing.
Yep.
So my first internship was actually on a hospital job, and I fell in love with, the problem solving aspect. And I also dug really deeply into the world of BIM and BDC. So I was lucky that on that project, it was a very kind of innovative project. There's a big focus on building things virtually before building it physically. And that just gave me a really cool crash course on kind of construction and some of the innovation in the industry. So I ended up joining DPR full time after college, worked on hospitals and data centers. And I think because of the time.
What was your role at DPR?
Project engineer. So I started as a project engineer.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think I was lucky that the time I entered industry was when there was a big focus on digitization, and it was when iPads were first coming into the space. Okay. So there was the whole digital job site, focus, trying to do everything on PDFs versus on paper. So I spent a lot of time just looking for new solutions to implement, because that was kind of the mission of innovation on the job.
Yeah, there got to be an easier way.
Exactly. And that, and I think I had always, been a very impatient person. So I was always looking for, efficiency gains and all the inefficiencies within construction. So I was lucky that at DPR, they really empowered me as a young person just coming out of college to go find technologies, implement them. So I worked with a lot of the startups that were just coming into construction at the time. So this was when FieldWire was just, first founded, Rumbix, PlanGrid, BIM Anywhere. Loved working with all these companies and continued working with the technology side throughout my career that was in operations. So I was never a BIM never fully a BIM manager or anything like that, or never on the innovation team, but I always loved the technology side.
You were pushing it.
Yeah. So got to a point in my career where I was kind of frustrated with how slow construction was adopting new tech. At the time, I'd worked on multiple projects, and just the craziness around the differences in how all of those projects, how all of those projects differed from the processes that were implemented and the technologies that were used kind of blew my mind. I was like, we're one company. Why are all of these different projects run so differently? And I was so naive at the time. I was like, this is why is this happening at DPR? And then I realized it was actually the same thing around the entire industry. So that was when I decided to, take a chance in jumping into the technology side. And I was actually recruited to go work at some of the construction tech startups, and thought that that's where I would end up going. But met the Brick Mortar team, and just kind of not knowing anything about venture capital, got a job opportunity and hopped on board to work with kind of as many startups as I would like.
That's amazing. That sounds fun. And I like how you you identify it as like your characteristic of impatience is really what drove you to all of that. You're like, that's a really good characteristic that drives innovation. You're like, I'm not going to wait for someone else to figure it out. I'm going to go figure it out myself. So I like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the most like innovative people in construction are actually like, they call themselves lazy because they're like, I don't want to, I don't want to spend all this time doing this like boring task,
Yep.
So it's like, oh, let me just build something that automates it. So like some of the smartest people that I know in construction, they're not lazy, but they're like, impatient, or they're just like, bored of doing the same thing. So they're like, okay, I'm gonna, build something.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I have friends who own companies, not within construction. So, but I believe this identification for areas of innovation, it comes down to, this is a question you can ask, is that why do you do it that way? And if the answer is, well, it's the way we've always done it, it doesn't necessarily mean that's wrong, but it's like, let's dive into that a little bit and see if there is a smarter way around it. And it's amazing how many times, like if you just step back and ask that question of things on your daily routine, why do we do it that way? And if the answer is like, oh, we had an entire initiative last year that drove some research and we defined that was the best way of doing it. All right, good. Move forward. But if it's like, we've been doing that for 30 years, be like,
why?
You gasp and then you try to figure out new ways. And it's not only, within in particular processes, but it might be a part of a process that you utilize. Sorry, you hit a chord with me there. So, all right. So brick and mortar, you're now into the venture capital and investment side of it, which is super exciting. In a former life, I was at more of a pre-money stage incubator VC. So it's a lot of fun, and it changes so often. But let's dive in a bit more into the investing in construction technology. So like, why is investing in construction technology so attractive right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of reasons. Like one of the first ones I kind of hinted at kind of in my career progression, right? So it was the kind of the invention of tablets.
Yep.
So that was one key thing that helped unlock, I guess, technology for construction, because, on the construction sites, like there's no, a lot of the times you're the first people there, right? So there's no power, there's no water, there's no infrastructure, there's probably no GPS, there's probably no, there's nothing there. So how do you get technology into the field? It's like, there were Panasonic Tough Books. I think they still exist now, but I just remember so distinctly before iPads, it was like Panasonic Tough Books.
Okay.
But it was like super clunky UI. You had basically a laptop with you on site.
Yeah.
No field person wanted to use that because it was like a computer, it was like bad UI, clunky. Like maybe you had your BIM engineer, BIM manager bring the model out in the field to try to leverage some of that tech. But it really wasn't until I would say and probably particularly Apple and iPhones, just having such a great design and UI that got into the hands of all these people who normally wouldn't use computers or technology.
Yeah.
Just such a simple device that they're now used to, calling people, taking photos, sending messages. So I think that really unlocked kind of this first generation of apps for construction. And I'm talking more for the field. So that kind of happened. And then now we're also seeing this almost second wave of construction field technology focusing on hardware and robotics, particularly on the robotics side. There's been, a huge cost reduction in LiDAR. There's been so much investment in autonomous driving and self-driving vehicles where they really drove down the price of all these sensors. So sensors are now a lot less expensive. Yeah. So you can actually build construction robotics fairly inexpensively, which is why we're seeing this kind of second generation of hardware-focused construction tech coming into the space.
There's a bunch roaming around here.
Exactly. There's there's probably 10 spots just kind of all around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are kind of some of the trends that have kind of recreated interest in innovation and focus on construction. And of course, I can't not mention the famous McKinsey chart of construction being second least product productive, blah, blah, blah. There's been a lot of research reports, studies on construction lagging in digitization. And then there's also on the hardware and technology side, some things that are unlocking those opportunities. So now it's at a time where, especially with the pandemic, construction being an essential business, and now with the infrastructure plan, there's just so many more people reading in the news about construction.
Yeah, it's more in the forefront.
Exactly. And they're no longer, I think a lot of people still think of construction as, they're doing, construction next door and it's a, annoying thing because it's loud and it's blocking my, my walking path and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think some of the branding around construction has maybe changed a little bit, where it's this is actually very necessary for life and the world.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that some of the branding and the stigma around construction being, loud, noisy, and all that.
Yeah.
And then now I guess there's also generalist investors interested in investing because they've seen, the PlanGrid acquisition by Autodesk, Viewpoint acquired by Trimble for $1.2 billion. So there's now a couple of exits in the space where, investors are
significant.
Exactly.
And so is that, brick and mortar, and there's a handful of others that are very specific to the construction industry. They have a lot of industry experience. But is that what you're saying, is you're starting to see investment from outside of the specialty area?
Yes.
More of the big tech investors coming in?
Yeah,
and
so there's
taking notice? Yeah,
there's a couple of trends. So I think we've seen a couple more kind of construction tech or prop tech funds that have popped up.
Yep.
So the latest one, Zakua. So Vivin, Mauricio, and Juan. They set up Zakua Ventures. They're more earlier stage. I think they're probably the latest one, but there's also Builders VC, Building Ventures, Blackhorn.
Go to New Hampshire.
Yeah, there's a couple of great ones, and we collaborate with everyone,
yeah.
right? And the thing is, there's not enough capital still.
Yeah.
So we're doing our part in educating generalist investors about the construction tech space. Some of them, and it's been great to see them reach out to us asking about.
So it's not a competitive scenario.
It's not at all. No,
because then you can go in together.
We also need more because we're early stage.
Yep.
And one big risk with construction tech startups is that they may be able to raise money from us, but at the later stage, if those investors don't understand construction, then it's a failure for the startup because they can't raise more money.
Yeah.
So we're kind of doing our best to help educate later stage investors about these opportunities as well.
Yep.
And then we're also seeing a lot of corporate venture capital groups pop up. So I don't know who's Home Depot announced a fund. Trimble Ventures, so there's
Hensel Phelps.
So there's a lot of great names that are now,
I pointed to Hensel Phelps, but that's where Ty was sitting earlier.
Yeah.
But that's it. Now I got sidetracked. I think I sidetracked both of us. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. But corporate venture capital, there's a lot more of these kind of popping up, and it's great to see just more money going into investing in early stage tech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that interesting in terms of, I originally would have thought it would have been no, I don't want the big ones to come in. But like you said, it's the different stage.
Yeah.
Like you come in and you can help with the growth because of that. And then is it really when you go from, like you said, when they mature out of the funds that you've provided and the resources that you've provided, it's less about construction and more about corporate growth, right? It's not about, but it's like, no, we got to get somebody in there who's like a PX, expert and all of the, a COO and start implementing that type of infusion of funds.
100%.
Yeah.
So we invest in seed and series A, and we think that's where we can add the most value because my background and the rest of my team's background, we all come from operations and a bunch of us have really deep AEC experience. So our biggest value add at those stages is really to kind of help guide some of those product discussions, really dig into, maybe you should test these things out too, or, like just to help expand the scope of what that startup is going after. And then, of course, our relationships with industry, whether it's through, our LPs that have invested in our fund, or our personal connections with industry, we really help bring, a lot of just pilot users, people are interested in new tech. We build a lot of those connections. And that's kind of at Seed and Series A, that's most valuable. And then after that, when you're raising a Series B and beyond, it is purely on, corporate growth or pure growth on the sales side, or, how to, architect the org structure of this and that, or maybe it's pure hiring on software engineering. And those are things that I think a lot of later stage VCs are really well set up to help with recruiting and all that type of stuff. And for us, it's like at the early stages, like we care a lot more about the industry, the problem they're solving. How do we help with kind of molding that startup before they're just grown?
Cool. All right. So Brick and Mortar Ventures mission statement on their website. So I'm going to read it because I haven't memorized it. So it's identify, invest in, and grow emerging companies developing innovative software and hardware solutions for the industries of architecture, engineering, construction, and facilities management. Take a breath. Immediately, what caught my eye was the facilities management side, where I feel like that is unique and maybe not necessarily focused on as much. But so are you finding a specific need in the industry for bridging that gap between the construct to the facilities management?
Yeah, I think that's more or less white space right now. And I've had enough conversations with entrepreneurs where I can confidently say, like, I've tried to pitch entrepreneurs to build something for that space. So during my time at DPR, I actually spent time working on handover documents, so tracking, like literally just and it's like such administrative work. But this was like me as a project engineer. It was like, make sure you get everything from your subcontractors before you close it out. Learn about commissioning to understand, like, where do you put all the warranty manuals, and like get all the test data and organize it, and then get all the as-built documents, get all the as-built models, and put it all in a hard drive and help hand it over to the client. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and it was a lot of administrative work. And I know there's a lot of people still complaining about it. And we are seeing some of the like bigger players like Autodesk trying to build something to fit that need. But there hasn't really been a kind of purpose-built solution just for commissioning and handover. And like, I always like to mention, pre-con is a very tricky spot that doesn't have a lot of innovation. And then handover commissioning is a tricky spot that we need to invest a lot more into, because anytime you're transitioning teams, that's when there's the biggest risk of like data loss from both a documentation plus a knowledge transfer perspective. So those are actually areas where it's like highest risk, but it's crazy that there aren't that many solutions going after that. And I think part of it is when you're looking at, a construction company or even a owner, right? They have different teams managing construction and operations and maintenance. And they're both driven by different incentives. So one is like, okay, let's, reduce construction costs, even at the expense of operating costs, right? So there's just like a lot of contractual and kind of organizational issues as to why there's lack of innovation there. But those are the biggest risk areas, and I want more entrepreneurs to like really look into those two spaces.
So I know one of my colleagues, Dan Connery, he's been in the industry for 27 years, and he says, like, before I retire, I would like to see the elimination of a few different processes. I know he said daily reports was one. He would like to see like he would love to hear in 10 years to ask somebody in the field, like, what's a daily report, and them to be like, what are you talking about? Excuse me. The other one was closeout and handover. In the technology that we have, we're like, how is this a thing? Like, it should just kind of move through. And we have something called asset lifecycle management, and the idea is being able to connect the data amongst planning, design, construct, operate, maintain, and that's actually more secular, right? That eventually that informs of a renovation or the next round or replacement. and it all, the way I categorize it is that it's a data problem.
Yep.
It's a data continuity problem, is because every single time you lose data, and then and handover is one of the biggest ones, because it's just, and then so I have a friend who works, so I live in New Hampshire, and he works for the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, and he's like, the amount of times that we have to go rescan something.
Oh yeah.
He goes, I know it was done. I have no idea where it is. I don't know if he coined the phrase, but at least it was the first time I heard it. It was dark data. He's like, it's dark data. I know it's there, but I can't find it. Yeah. So I digress a little bit. So this is my magic wand question. So if you could identify one thing that's holding the industry back that you could fix with the magic wand, what would it be?
Culture. But I think that's a big one, and maybe it's like, when you have 3 wishes, it's like, you can't wish for more wishes.
I want more wishes.
Yeah. It almost feels like that, where just the cultural challenge with construction, and maybe this isn't just construction, and it's across a lot of other industries. But in construction, I think it's this adversarial relationship, and it's almost, if you go back into, and I don't know the history of how construction was set up, but I can only imagine that it was always set up where, you get 3 bids, it's competitive, and you almost have this whole checks and balance across the entire supply chain. Mm-hmm. Just because that's how you get a quality, how do you get a quality product, right? Is you have checks and balances, quality control, and all this. So in theory, it makes sense why. Yeah. But what that leads to are all these processes where you're passing paper back and forth for approvals, when in theory, you can probably skip certain processes if you all just sit together in a room and agree on something, right? Yep. But at the end of the day, it's like we are bound to our contracts, and also just the culture that kind of people who have worked in industry for a long time, their teachings to the younger people coming into industry is, you can't let the architect treat you this way, or, you can't let the sub try to get away with this change. There's just all this adversarial relationship that it's like, it kind of needs to just stop, or else we can't collaborate.
So do you think that starts with the contracting mechanism?
So that's where I kind of go back and forth a lot. And this is actually an area where I'm very interested and passionate about, is this whole, do the contracts actually dictate how you operate on site? And I've seen a lot of IPD projects and have talked to people where IPD is integrated project delivery, for those who don't know. But it's like, you bring in, I'm thinking, I've said it a couple times where they're like, so it's like, you have the owner, the design team, and the contractors, and kind of the key group or key people from each of those groups come together and sign one contract, so that you're collaborating and delivering the project to the best interest of the entire team, rather than to each individual, right? So you kind of open up, how do you make money? Where are margins? In theory, you kind of open up all of that. Yep. So I've seen projects where it's an IPD job or contract type, and the project have gone really well. So my first job, the UCSF hospital job, it was an IPD-like job, and it went really well, and everyone loved it. It was so collaborative, it was great. And then there are a lot of other stories that I've heard where there are IPD jobs that have gone wrong. And then there are certain situations where you may have the same owner, architect, and contractor companies with an IPD job, but different people from each of the companies that have varying ranges of success. Okay. Right? So when I think of that, I'm like, it's not a contract problem. It may not even be a company problem. It's a one-to-one individual person kind of matching, how do you find people who get along and jive regardless of...
So you could have any contracting mechanism, but if people just
don't want to work, or they don't work well together. Right?
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those touchy-feely things that there hasn't been a lot of research in, and I don't know if there is research in even other industries on how to create this, high-performing team. I know Stanford Sci-Fi, and there's a couple of other groups that are looking into what makes a high-performing team. Yeah. but what's tangible are, contracting methods, like meetings to get people to, come together, project charters. But a lot of that doesn't actually make it through to the rest of the team if the leadership doesn't buy into the, culture. And so that's also part of culture too. Like there's there's a lot there.
There is a lot to unpack on that one. Because when you first brought up culture, I was thinking of the culture around construction in general and our labor shortage problem.
Oh,
and the younger generations. So I had a guest on Aaron Witt from Build Wit.
Yeah.
And he's carrying the flag or the torch. We don't want to say about trying to change the culture and provide better workforce development tools and things like that. And I really like that. It's like, hey, show that it's kind of a cool industry. You can do some really cool things. You can go to really cool places. So that's where I thought. But then you're right. It's just in the adversarial collaboration is so its culture is kind of divergent there, but it's both kind of hit it.
Yeah,
so that's really interesting. All right, going back to brick and mortar again. Can you share a story of a portfolio company or a couple stories? I don't want you to have to pick a favorite. So if she chooses one, it doesn't mean it's her favorite. But like how that company is making an impact in construction, and is there a project that maybe highlights this?
Yeah, the one that's top of mind is Rod Radar. So I think if you talk to anyone in construction, they've probably experienced a utility strike on their project, or they've gotten, a regional message about this project in your region at your company has hit a utility and you've shut down, power to this huge neighborhood or whatever it is, right? Like I think almost everyone in construction has probably heard of or experienced a utility strike of some sort.
Yep.
So Rod Radar is one of our portfolio companies that is basically integrating a ground penetrating radar into a dig bucket. And their whole mission is to avoid utility strikes, so that as you are excavating, if you are about to hit a utility, the goal is that you get alerted and eventually stop. So they want to get into machine control.
So eventually what they're saying is it won't even allow you.
It won't even allow you to hit. And we've studied this space a lot and looked at, can you do as-built? Can you look at as-builts? Can you look at, surveying first? But a lot of it is a lot of that is not accurate enough. And frankly, even if you survey it and you give, a map to the guy who's, controlling the excavator, there's still a chance that, you may see something or get distracted or whatever, you may still hit a utility.
Yeah.
So for a Rod Radar integrated into the dig bucket and allowing to actually stop it from happening, I think that's very powerful. And that's one where I think, there are a lot of deaths in construction due to utility strikes. And to me, that makes, if we can solve that problem, that'll make me feel really good. And not just from a investment, it's a hard investment because it's hardware. But we invested in that company because we know this is a big problem for industry. And we think that the industry needs this, right? It's not just, I think that's the interesting thing about brick and mortar is we are investing for financial returns, but we also still have a mission, and we know industry deep enough where it's okay, well, we need to invest here because that's just what the industry needs. And that's one of those companies. Yeah.
I love it. All right. So we are actually at our last question. All right. And I gave you a little bit of warning. What is your motto? Or if you don't have your own personal motto, not everybody has their own personal motto. What's a motto that you've heard of that you think is a really good life lesson or something to kind of drive you?
Yeah, I did not think of another one. So it would be Nike, just do it. I think, that was always one. I've always really loved Nike, growing up, whether it's the shoes or the story behind the company and supply chain and all that. So I think Nike's an incredible company. And from I guess just do it. I don't know, do it.
It matches that, going back to the beginning of this conversation, that spirit of impatience. Just do it.
I guess that's true. Yeah, you're like my psychologist now. Just do it.
There it is. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alice. It's been fantastic hearing everything that you have to share. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right, and everybody out there listening, viewing, until next time, stay connected.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Connected Construction Show. For more information, visit us at connectedconstructionshow.com.